September 2024, a Florida golf course, a rifle, and a man with a plan so dangerous it threatened not only a former president, but the stability of a nation already fractured by violence and division. This is the story of Ryan Wesley Routh. Who he was, how he came to stand accused of plotting to assassinate President Donald Trump, and the extraordinary trial now unfolding before the eyes of the world. Welcome back to True Crime After Dark, where we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind and uncover the cases that demand to be heard. Tonight, we trace the life, the actions, and the consequences of a man whose name has become synonymous with one of the most chilling assassination attempts in modern history. Chapter 1. Who is Ryan Wesley Routh? Ryan Wesley Routh was, at first glance, an ordinary man. Born in North Carolina in the mid-1960s, he grew up during a time when the Cold War still shaped American fears, and when politics was beginning to harden into the deep divisions we now live with. Neighbors who knew him described him as private, sometimes erratic, and often distrustful of authority. Over the years, Routh's life was marked by turbulence, brushes with the law, strained relationships, and a worldview that grew darker and more conspiratorial with age. By the time he reached his late 50s, Routh had become obsessed with politics and international conflict. He posted frequently on social media, writing about wars overseas, weapons, and the American government. His writings gave a glimpse into a man who felt alienated, angry, and increasingly desperate to be heard. Prosecutors say that behind those words was something far more dangerous, a man who was plotting an assassination. It was the morning of September 15, 2024, when Secret Service agents assigned to Donald Trump's protective detail began their day like countless others. The former president was scheduled for a routine outing at his beloved Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach, Florida. The security team knew the terrain well: rolling fairways, tree lines that provided shade and concealment, and perimeters carefully mapped and monitored. Every hole, every vantage point, every parking lot had been swept dozens of times before. But on this morning something was different. Someone else had chosen this place, not for leisure, but for violence. The preparation. According to prosecutors, Ryan Wesley Routh had spent weeks preparing. He had allegedly scouted the area, studying both the landscape and the rhythm of Trump's visits. He is said to have walked the outer edges of the course, identifying the best sight lines, the spots where cover was available, and the potential blind spots in Secret Service patrols. Investigators later revealed that Routh had purchased a high-powered rifle, along with multiple magazines of ammunition. He allegedly used burner phones and aliases to hide his movements. His planning, they argued, bore the marks of someone intent on carrying out an assassination attempt. The moment. On that fateful morning, agents patrolling the course noticed movement along a tree line. A man was seen adjusting something long and metallic, later confirmed to be a rifle. One Secret Service agent testified that he came within 5 feet of the barrel before realizing what it was. The detail immediately sprang into action, shielding Trump, alerting reinforcements, and moving to intercept. But Routh fled before he could fire a shot. Authorities later said the rifle had been loaded, chambered, and positioned to fire from a distance. The arrest. After a frantic search, agents tracked Routh down. He was arrested without further violence, though prosecutors say he was still carrying additional ammunition. The case was immediately turned over to the FBI and federal prosecutors. Within hours, the charges mounted: attempted assassination of a former U.S. president, assaulting federal officers, possession of firearms and ammunition by a prohibited person. The nation exhaled in relief. Trump was unharmed, but the close call sent a shockwave across America. If not for the vigilance of the Secret Service that morning, the headlines could have been catastrophic. The fallout. News of the attempt spread instantly. Televised images showed the golf course sealed off with yellow tape, agents patrolling with rifles, and reporters broadcasting live updates. To Trump's supporters, it was proof of what they had feared all along, that the political climate had grown so toxic, so filled with hatred, that violence was becoming inevitable. To others, it was a wake-up call about just how vulnerable public figures remained, even with the world's best security around them. For Ryan Wesley Routh, it was the beginning of a legal battle that would thrust him into the national spotlight, not as a name on a ballot or a political leader, but as a man accused of one of the most serious crimes imaginable. To understand the significance of Ryan Wesley Routh's trial, we first need to understand the man himself. Who was he before the headlines? What shaped him into someone prosecutors now accuse of plotting an assassination? Early life and background. Ryan Wesley Routh was born in 1965 in North Carolina into a time of social change, cultural upheaval, and political uncertainty. The Cold War, the Vietnam War, and shifting American identity formed the backdrop of his youth. Not much about his childhood has been made public, but those who encountered him over the decades describe a man who lived on the fringes, often restless, sometimes angry, and deeply skeptical of authority. By his 30s and 40s, Routh had already attracted attention for erratic behavior. He developed a reputation for posting strange, sometimes aggressive messages online. His writings often mentioned politics, war, and grievances with governments both foreign and domestic. The radicalization. Prosecutors allege that over the years, Routh's worldview hardened. He spent time abroad, became increasingly outspoken on international conflicts, and began posting about weapons and resistance movements. In fact, one trail of evidence shows that he once tried to recruit foreign fighters to support causes overseas. His fascination with armed conflict was not new, but according to investigators, it grew into an obsession. By his late 50s, Routh was, in the government's eyes, a man on the edge, consumed by political rage and drawn to violence as a solution. A man of many faces. Court records show that Routh often lived under the radar. He worked odd jobs, moved around frequently, and kept few close relationships. People who knew him described him in different ways. To some, he was just a loner with too much time online. To others, he seemed bitter, unpredictable, and dangerous. One former acquaintance told reporters, "You never knew what Ryan was going to say. One day he'd be talking about politics, the next day he'd be ranting about weapons and world leaders. It was like he lived in his own world." The mindset before the alleged plot. By the summer of 2024, investigators say Routh was already planning. He was spending time online researching security perimeters, writing about resistance movements, and moving in ways that, in hindsight, looked like preparation. Prosecutors allege that his decision to target Donald Trump was fueled not just by politics, but by years of frustration, anger, and a belief that violence could achieve what words could not. To them, Routh wasn't simply a man with a gun, he was a man who had convinced himself that action, however extreme, was justified, the government's narrative. When Routh's trial began in September 2025, prosecutors painted a chilling picture, a man obsessed with politics and violence, someone who scouted, planned, and prepared for weeks, a man who loaded a rifle, chambered a round, and positioned himself to kill a sitting president. To the jury, they argue, this wasn't just poor judgment or reckless behavior, it was intent. The story of Ryan Wesley Routh is as much about a single moment on a Florida golf course as it is about the decades that led to it. Decades of anger, isolation, and choices that prosecutors now say culminated in attempted assassination. By September 2025, nearly a year after the alleged attempt on Donald Trump's life, Ryan Wesley Routh's trial began in a federal courthouse in Florida. For weeks, anticipation had been building. Security around the courthouse was intense, with law enforcement patrols, restricted access zones, and media crews stationed outside to capture every development. Jury selection. Selecting a jury for this case was no ordinary process. Prosecutors and defense attorneys, in this case Routh himself, questioned dozens of potential jurors. The challenge was immense. Nearly every American had heard about the case. Some potential jurors admitted they already had strong opinions about Trump, about political violence, or about the dangers of firearms. Others confessed that the assassination attempt itself made them fearful of serving. Eventually, a jury of 12 citizens plus alternates was seated. They were instructed to avoid all media coverage and to focus only on the evidence presented in court. Their faces revealed the weight of their responsibility. Routh represents himself. In a highly unusual move, Ryan Wesley Routh chose to represent himself at trial. Despite the judge warning him of the risks, Routh insisted he could speak for himself better than any lawyer could. Legal analysts noted that self-representation in such a high-stakes case is often a sign of either extreme confidence or deep distrust of the legal system. Some suggested it might be both. Inside the courtroom, his decision immediately shaped the atmosphere. Instead of polished attorneys presenting his defense, Routh himself stood at the podium, disheveled at times, sometimes coherent, other times rambling, opening statements. When it came time for opening statements, prosecutors wasted no time. They laid out the government's case with precision. Routh scouted the golf course. He carried a rifle, fully loaded and chambered. He was intercepted by a Secret Service agent only moments before he could act. They argued that the evidence, Physical, digital, and testimonial showed not just preparation but intent to assassinate. Then it was Routh's turn. His opening statement began quietly but soon spiraled. He spoke not only about the case but about politics, wars overseas, and grievances that stretched far beyond the courtroom. At one point, Judge Aileen Cannon intervened, cutting him off and warning him that the court would not be turned into a political stage. If he strayed again, she said, he risked forfeiting his right to represent himself. The courtroom atmosphere. Reporters inside described the mood as tense and surreal. On one side, prosecutors methodically building their case. On the other, a defendant using his time to vent grievances and challenge the very system prosecuting him. Observers noted how the jury watched him closely. Some jurors appeared sympathetic, others skeptical, but all were alert. For them, the stakes could not be higher, deciding the fate of a man accused of trying to kill the President of the United States. What's next? As the trial moved forward, the focus shifted to witness testimony. Secret Service agents, forensic experts, and digital analysts, each laying out their piece of the puzzle. But the opening days set the tone. A clash between a government determined to prove intent and a defendant determined to tell his own story, however chaotic it might sound. The trial of Ryan Wesley Routh had begun, and the world was watching. The heart of any trial lies in the testimony, the voices of those who were there, and the experts who sifted through evidence. In the case of Ryan Wesley Routh, these testimonies have been nothing short of dramatic. Secret Service agents. One of the first witnesses was the Secret Service agent who confronted Routh on the morning of the alleged attempt. His words carried the weight of a near miss with history. I was within 5 feet of the barrel of his rifle before I realized what I was looking at. The agent described how he spotted movement near the tree line, how his instincts screamed that something was wrong, and how in a split second he recognized the threat. The jury listened intently as the agent described the rifle, loaded, chambered, and ready to fire. Prosecutors emphasized that it was only seconds, perhaps moments, that separated safety from tragedy. Forensic evidence. Experts from the FBI laid out the physical evidence. The rifle itself, presented in the courtroom. Ballistics tests showing it was in working order. Fingerprints and DNA tied back to Routh. Cell phone data suggesting he had searched maps of the golf course and security perimeters. The prosecution argued that these pieces built a chain too strong to ignore. This was not chance. This was intent. Digital footprints. Another key part of the government's case involved Routh's online activity. Investigators revealed posts, messages, and writings that spoke about political violence, grievances with leaders, and admiration for armed conflict overseas. While the defense, in this case Routh himself, argued that words were not actions, prosecutors told the jury that in this case the words foretold what was about to happen, the jury's reaction. Courtroom reporters noted that the jury leaned forward during testimony, especially when the rifle was displayed. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably as the forensic details were explained. For them, the question would be simple but profound. Was this a man who simply talked big, or was this a man who intended to change history with a trigger pull? The testimonies painted a chilling picture, one that left the courtroom silent at times, with only the scratch of pens and the hum of air conditioning breaking the tension. As the trial moves forward, the outcome remains uncertain, but the stakes could not be higher. If convicted, Ryan Wesley Routh faces the possibility of life in federal prison. The charge of attempting to assassinate a sitting U.S. president carries the harshest penalties available under law. Routh's defense. Because he represents himself, Routh's defense has been erratic. He's argued that his intentions were misunderstood, that his writings and movements do not prove he meant to kill. At times he's shifted into political speeches, forcing Judge Cannon to rein him back in. Observers say this unpredictability may alienate jurors, or it may convince some that he is unstable rather than calculating. The risk for Routh is enormous. His words are the only shield he has. What's at stake for America? This case is not only about Ryan Wesley Routh, it's about political violence in America. It's about whether deep divisions can spill into violence against leaders. And it's about how far one man was willing to go to try to shape the course of history. Security experts warn that the case highlights vulnerabilities in protecting public figures. Legal scholars point to the importance of a fair trial, even for someone accused of such a grave crime. And across the nation, Americans are watching, waiting for a verdict. The legacy of the case. No matter the outcome, the Routh trial will be remembered, either as the conviction of a man who nearly altered history, or as a reminder of how fragile security can be when political rage turns violent. For the jury, the decision will be life-changing. Not just for Ryan Wesley Routh, but for the precedent it sets about violence in America's political landscape. Closing words. This has been the story of Ryan Wesley Routh, the man, the alleged assassin, and the defendant now standing trial for one of the most serious crimes in American history. As his fate hangs in the balance, so too does a nation's reflection on just how divided and dangerous our politics have become. No matter what verdict comes from this trial, one truth remains: there is no room for violence in American politics, or in America as a whole. The attempt on President Donald Trump's life, the second time he has been saved from an assassin's bullet, is a sobering reminder of just how fragile peace and security can be. Whatever our divisions, whatever our disagreements, violence must never be the answer. Thank goodness our president was saved that day, and thank goodness the system built to protect our leaders worked when it mattered most. Thank you for watching True Crime After Dark. If you believe these stories must be told, please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue shining a light into the darkest corners of the human mind.